Welcome to The Reader's Couch, a podcast that brings you lively conversations with some of your favourite authors and bookish personalities. Over here, the couch is always booked, but I've moved some books to the side table and fluffed some cushions so I can welcome a guest or two to come lounge with us. In today's episode, I will be closing out our top 10 books of 2021 series and season 1 of the podcast with my personal top 10 books of 2021. But before I get into the books, I just really want to thank you for listening to each episode in the series thus far and for taking the ride with me and all the wonderful readers who came on the show to share their top 10 books of the year. I really appreciated just having every reader on the show, and I want to take the opportunity to thank again Kim Brock, Dee Baker, Jennifer Furr, Abigail Singri, Amy Gruenwald, Kelly Lycurgus, Kelly Hooker, Kimberly, Michelle Martin, and Kimberly Poole. Again, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your top 10. Now, I will be closing out the series and season 1 of the podcast with my personal top 10 books of 2021. Now, my top 10 list is completely different from Biblio Lifestyle's top 10 fiction and non-fiction list. Now, unlike the top 10 fiction and non-fiction list I did for Biblio Lifestyle, these books I'll be sharing today are my personal favourites. They may not be perfect, but what they did for me was provided a reading experience that was either super relatable, enjoyable, memorable, or just really entertaining. So, with all that said, now it's time to get into the books. So my top 10 is all fiction because at my core, I'm a lover of all things fiction, and I'll be counting down from 10 to 1. But these books are in no particular order because I just could never rank my books like that. It was hard enough just selecting 10 books here, and I'm not cheating, I promise. It will be 10 books. Okay, so the first book on my list, book 10, is Summer Water by Sarah Moss. This book was published on January 12, 2021, and if you subscribe to my newsletter and keep up with the reading guides, this was one of my literary fiction selections. It was also a Minimalist Reads pick for Winter 21, and it was also in Biblio Lifestyle's top 10 fiction reads for 21 as well. Now, I'm a huge Sarah Moss fan. I loved her book Ghost Wall that she published, I think it was 2019. I thought that book was so well done. Anywho, Summer Water is set on the longest day of summer where 12 people are cooped up with their families in a cabin park in the Scottish Highlands. Now, it's raining all the time there, so there's very little for them to do except really watch each other. So each section of the book focuses on a different individual, and all these folks who are on their summer break, they're all at different stages in their lives. But through the novel, we get to see what they're going through and what they think of other people at the park. Now, in the end, suspicions start to arise and it causes some tension, and then a catastrophe occurs. Now, I know that's not much to go on, but it's a really fascinating book. I thought it was extremely thought-provoking. It had moments when it was really funny too. And in my opinion, in true Sarah Moss fashion, there was like this underlying message, just like in her previous book, Ghost Wall. If for nothing else, I think, if you're a lover of just really beautiful and atmospheric prose, I highly recommend this book. It's also very short, so it's definitely something you can read and finish in a sitting or a day. But anywho, that's book 10 on my list. It's Summer Water by Sarah Moss. Okay, book 9 on my list is Poppy Show by Leonie Ross. This book was published back in April, so it was April 20th, 2021. Again, this was another selection for my reading guide for spring, as well as being on the minimalist list. Now, I always struggle when trying to describe Poppy Show to other readers because it is a genre-bending novel, but I would definitely say it's more magical realism than anything else. Now, Poppy Show is set in a fictional island country where each person is born with a unique magical power or talent. They're called cores, so that's C-O-R-S. So some of the cores could include having extreme strength, being able to tell if someone's lying trying. And in the case of Xavier, who's a main character we're following in the novel, he has the ability to cook a meal for someone to their own individual, unique taste. And it's always something that you want to eat in that moment. And it's just very delicious and tasty. So anyways, the islanders have all different magic abilities, and magic is all around them. Now, the story intertwines the lives of quite a few islanders, but it centers around Xavier, who's grieving the death of his wife, and there's also a niece whose marriage is in trouble after having a series of miscarriages. Now, through the novel, it's really a portrait of community. It's just very lush and vibrant. What I also loved about Poppy Show is it had this critique of the legacies of colonialism and just corruption. So even though it was set in a fictional island, I think it was reminiscent of what a lot of Caribbean folks, would experience, I would say. Also, even though it's a fictional country, it was heavily inspired by the author's Jamaican background, which is something I picked up on and I could relate to immediately. There was just a lot of island mythologies, a lot of their practices and beliefs were represented, while also turning some of, these myths and traditions on their head. And I loved it. So, if you're looking for maybe a book that's just really immersive, magical realism, very descriptive, while also entertaining, I think this is a good read. I thought the beauty shone through on the pages. And, I will give you a comparison. If you read and loved 100 Years of Solitude, I invite you to give this one a go. They're similar but different. But if you could appreciate that book, I think you would appreciate Poppy Show as well. So again, it's Poppy Show by Leonie Ross. Okay, book 8 on my list is Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. This book was published in the height of summer. This was published in July 6, 2021. And if you keep up with my newsletter and reading guides, I recommended this one in our summer reading guide for 2021. This was under thrillers and mysteries. Now, I am an S.A. Cosby fan. If he writes a book, I'm going to read it. It's an auto read. I was sold on his previous novel, Blacktop Wasteland. After reading that book, I was saying, hey, when's the movie coming out? I think this book would do really well on screen. And I feel the same about his latest book, Razorblade Tears. So Razorblade Tears is set in a small town in Virginia where two ex-cons, one black and one white, with little to nothing in common except, they're convicts. They band together, desperate for revenge when their sons, who were married to each other, were murdered on their anniversary, and the police investigation stalls. So this is a gritty kind of thriller. It's fast-paced, it's action-packed, just everything you could think of that you love in a Southern thriller. And these two dads are out for vengeance. Now, disclaimer, I know this book won't have this great universal appeal that most thrillers do because it is gritty, there's violence, and there's harsh language. But ultimately, it's a story of fatherhood, family, race, and there are bits of homophobia in there as well. And having to confront one's prejudices. In this case, the dads had to confront that about the thoughts they had about their sons. But again, if you're not afraid of something gritty with a bit of violence, a bit of noir, I highly recommend you give Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby a go. Okay, book 7 on my list is Second Place by Rachel Cusk. This book was published back in May 4th, 2021. And again, if you're following the newsletters and reading guides, I recommended Second Place in my summer reading guide under literary fiction. And it's also one of Biblio Lifestyle's top 10 books for 21. Now, I'm a huge Rachel Cusk fan. I absolutely adore her work. There's just something about her writing that just pulls me in, and I absolutely adored her Outline trilogy. Anyway, Second Place, in this novel, a woman invites a famous artist to come use her guest house where she lives with her family. Now, she lives in a remote coastal landscape, and she invites this artist because she's very drawn to his paintings, and she believes that by having him there, his presence will help to solve the mystery that's at the center of her life. But instead, what happens is that his presence disrupts the calm in her life and her household, and he turns out to be this huge enigma that kind of really drives her up the wall a bit. Again, I know this isn't much to go on, but if you love stories about women who seek to find meaning and take agency in their lives, I think this one is for you. And even though we see this woman in crisis, I just felt the narrative was just timeless and thought-provoking. Now, it's also dark, this book, but the prose was just very beautiful and the narrative just had this dramatic flair to it. Also, I know there are readers out there who are possibly intimidated by Rachel Cusk. I completely understand. And if you are, and if you're looking for a place to start, I think this book would be a good place for you to start. So again, it's Second Place by Rachel Cusk. Okay, book 6. Book 6 on my list is In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. This book was published more to the end of summer, and it was published on August 3rd, 2021. Now, I love this thriller. And in the book, we meet Jessica Miller, who's the novel's narrator. And in the present day, she's a New York City consultant, and she decides to attend her university's 10th reunion, despite knowing that going to this reunion might bring up old wounds, as it surrounds the murder of a university student called Heather Shelby. Now, Jessica and the dead girl, Heather, belong to a clique known as East House 7. And of the 7, only one person, Jack Carroll, who was Heather's ex-boyfriend, declines to go to the reunion. And every other member, except for Jessica, believes he killed Heather. Now, also at the reunion is Heather's brother, Eric Shelby, who works at the alumni office. And he's taking this opportunity to interrogate Jessica and the others in the group because he's certain one of them is the murderer. So in the novel, we see flashbacks to their school days where we see a lot of deceit and disloyalty, and tensions start to rise at this reunion, and Eric refuses to let the group go until he gets to know the truth. Now, I know there are tons of thrillers out there, but I think what made this one so unique is just the great character development. I think, it was just deeply layered. It was also mind-blowing at the same time. And there was just this great balance between the premise. It was just haunting and intriguing, and you wanted to know, and it kept you turning the pages. It was also a smart thriller, while also just being shocking and entertaining all at the same time. I just loved it. Again, it's In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. Okay, we're at the halfway point. Yay! So, book 5 on my list is Fault Lines by Emily Itami. This novel was published September 7th, 21, and I had the pleasure of interviewing Emily Itami on the podcast. So if you didn't listen to this one already, just head on back. It's episode 3. I recorded this interview back in September. And after reading this novel, I just really wanted to speak to her to get more insight. And I was just thrilled when she accepted the invite to come on the show. So again, highly recommend tuning into that episode. If you haven't read the novel yet, no need to fear because there's no spoilers. It's a real spoiler-free episode, but it's still really fun. Anywho, here's a summary of the book. In Fault Lines, we meet Mizuki. She's an affluent Tokyo housewife who seems to have it all. But after 10 years, she's kind of reevaluating her marriage. She's been married to her husband for some time. She has 2 young kids. And she notices her husband really isn't helping with the children. He's coming home super cranky and he's very distracted and just removed. And sometimes he really treats her badly as well. Anyway, Mizuki has moments where she contemplates, just ending it all because she hates the idea of just spending evenings not even being able to have a conversation with her husband. But one day, she meets Kiyoshi, who is a successful restaurateur. They end up having an affair, and it's clear to Mizuki she's living 2 lives and she has to choose one. Now, I know this novel has a super provocative premise. I know some folks might be super uncomfortable with the idea of, affairs and infidelity. But ultimately, it's a story about just marriage, motherhood, female identity, and just finding oneself. I was also intrigued, and this is also something I discussed on the podcast, about the way the author chose to present Mizuki to us in the novel. I mean, she's incredibly flawed, but at the same time, she felt realistic and I found myself having empathy towards her, even though she was making a string of bad decisions. Anyway, I just thought the book was so well done. And again, if you haven't already, tune into the podcast. The name of the novel is Fault Lines by Emily Itami. Okay, so number 4 on my list is The Love Songs of W.E. Du Bois by Honoré Jeffers. This novel was published near the end of summer. This was August 24th, 2021. And again, if you keep up with the newsletter and reading guides, I recommended this one in my summer reading guide under literary fiction. It was also a Minimalist Reads pick, and it's also one of Biblio Lifestyle's top 10 for 2021. Now, this book has been revered all around. It was selected as Oprah's book club selection. Quite a few readers who came on the show also shared this as their top 10 as well. And I'm here to tell you this book deserves all the praise. This is a big book. It's a hefty book. I know what you're thinking. I can do weights with this, Victoria. I can exercise with this book. It's a big one. However, don't be intimidated by the size. When you pick this one up, you're going to get pulled into the novel so much so that at the end of the 800 plus pages, you're going to want more. It's just one of those reads. Anywho, here's a brief summary of the novel that I've been sharing with friends. And in the book, we meet Ailey. And she's the descendant of enslaved Georgians and tenant farmers. And she follows in her parents' footsteps and attends an HBCU, which is a historically black college and university. And we see her reckon with her ancestral trauma while growing up in the 1980s and 90s. We also get a glimpse at her family history from centuries before, from the colonial slave trade to present day. So this is a generational novel. It's a generational history. I think I was just taken aback at just how beautifully written this book was. I also felt that the author's poetic background really helped to make this novel shine. And I don't think there's much more I'm going to say, except you need to read this book. You need to have this book. Have it on your bookshelves. Carve out some time for it. You really need to read this book. It was just so well done. So again, give The Love Songs of W.E. Du Bois by Honoré Jeffers a go. Okay, book 3. So book 3 on my list is The Days of Aphrodite by Asali Solomon. This novel was published in October 19th, 2021. And again, if you keep up with my newsletter, again, if you're listening and you're not subscribed, you really should subscribe to my newsletter. But anywho, I recommended this one in the fall reading guide for 2021. This book was found under novels with themes of family and friendship. It was also a Minimalist Reads pick and one of the 3 books I recommended that you gift this holiday season. And it's also a Biblio Lifestyle top 10 read for 2021. So it's fair to say, since I've read this book, I've been hyping this book. I really feel like it's a sleeper. I'm not seeing a bunch of folks sharing for it, or maybe it's just my Instagram feed, but I think this book is amazing. Now, this book has been described as being inspired by Mrs. Dalloway, Sula, Audre Lorde's Zami. Now, I've read Mrs. Dalloway, loved Mrs. Dalloway, love Sula, and I'm here to say yes. It does have that inspiration. I see it, I feel it through the pages. Anyway, in the novel, we meet 2 friends. One lady is Lizelle Belmont, and she's having a dinner party. Ding, 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 Mrs. Dalloway. Anyway, the dinner party she's hosting is strange in itself because her husband lost his electoral race that he was running for, but she decides to host the party anyway to kind of thank key supporters for supporting her husband's campaign, even though she had reservations about him being a politician. But then an FBI agent calls to warn her that he might be facing corruption charges. And then in that moment, she starts to question herself, question everything in their life, in their marriage, and just wondering, how is she going to make it through this dinner party with this knowledge? On the opposite side, we meet Selena, whose life is the opposite of Lizelle, and she's just trying her best to make it through her days. She's reflecting on her life and realizes that, the only time she was ever really, truly happy was when she was with Lizelle back in college. but they've lost touch with each other. So ultimately, in the days of Afriquite, we meet two women at midlife who were friends and lovers, and we see them rediscover themselves and reflect on their life choices. They reflect on sexuality, and they reflect also on race. So I highly recommend this one for fans of Mrs. Dalloway and Sula. Anyone who loves reading about female friendships, relationships, coming of late age, specifically midlife, because this is where these characters are in their life, and just readers who appreciate just beautiful prose and language, because I felt like this book was so well done. So I highly recommend you give it a go. It reads like a classic, and it's The Days of Afriquite by Asali Solomon. Okay, 2 more books left on the list, and book 2 is Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. I think this was one of the most anticipated novels of the year, and it graced bookshelves back in September 7th, 21. And again, I recommended this one in our fall reading guide under literary fiction. It was also one of our top 10 books for the year. And in my humble opinion, I think Beautiful World, Where Are You is Sally Rooney's best work yet. In true Sally Rooney style, you know, she continues to explore themes of class, sex, life in Ireland, a millennial life, mental health. And this story I found to be quite interesting because it's about a successful Irish writer named Alice. And I'm like, ding ding, isn't that you, Sally Rooney? But yeah, it's about this successful Irish writer named Alice and her best friend Eileen and the lovers in their life. So anyway, in the novel, we meet Alice, who's a successful author who suffered a nervous breakdown as a result of her work being so popular. And after her breakdown, she moved away from Dublin to a small seaside town. And there she met a young man called Felix. He's a local, and she invites him to accompany her on a work trip to Rome. And while there, it was just quite interesting, you know, I could tell Felix fell in love with her, but he also resented her because of, you know, her attitude. He feels like she's a bit of a snob and just this superiority factor she has. And mind you, this guy is just a regular working class guy. He's working in a warehouse. We also meet Alice's best friend, Eileen. She works a low-paying job at a literary magazine, and she is currently exploring her romantic feelings to a childhood friend. However, you know, he's continuing to see other women and dating and just kind of like passing her by, I guess. I think that's how she felt. But anywho, but what I loved was Alice and Eileen updating each other. And just the fact that they mostly communicate through really long emails. And they muse about all sorts of things, from culture to climate change to political upheaval, life in Ireland, and just the state of the world. I mean, do you debate all these things with your friends via email? I don't think so. But anyway, I loved reading about it. And I just love this novel. Again, I feel this is her best work yet. I personally could have kept on reading. I wanted more. I love her narrative style. I love that style to her work. And most of all, just how it shows human desire. And the main one of which is seeking, you know, connection in the world and with others and just people in your life. So yeah, I loved it. Again, it's Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. And now it's time for the drum roll. Now for my number 1 book, even though I said these books were in no particular order, but hands down for me, my number 1 book on my list of top 10 books of 2021 is Assembly by Natasha Brown. This book was published in September 14th, 21. And again, keep up with my reading guides and newsletters because I recommended this one in our fall reading guide under literary fiction. It was also a Minimalist Reads pick, and it's one of our top 10 reads for 2021 as well. Now, I had the pleasure of interviewing author Natasha Brown on the podcast, so just go back into the archives to episode 7 that I recorded in October. And after reading the novel, I had to speak to her. I'm not even going to say I wanted to speak to her. I felt like I had to speak to her. I wanted more insight, and again, I was just so over the moon that she accepted my invitation. So again, go tune into that episode. And don't worry if you haven't read the novels, 0 spoilers, I promise. It will just enhance your reading experience if you read it. And if you haven't read it, it will egg you on to go get it. And again, the episode is spoiler free. Anywho, in Assembly by Natasha Brown, we meet our narrator, an unnamed young black British woman who works in finance. She works hard, and she has been working for as long as she can remember. And she's working in this pursuit of achievement, of success, and just this excellence, and just doing everything basically that society has told her to do. Also in the novel, we meet her boyfriend, who is this white man who's come from old family money. And his parents are hosting an anniversary party in their lavish country manor, and our narrator has been invited to attend. So while preparing for this lavish party, our narrator considers the carefully assembled pieces of her life, and she starts to question whether or not it's time to take her life apart. Now, this tells more of an older millennial story, and this novel's really short, but it's definitely worth the read. It's something you can finish in one sitting or a day. And I mean, right after I was done, I just wanted to read it again. And I did read it again. And reading it that second time with the full knowledge of the ending, I feel I just loved on this book even more. And despite being such a short novel, I mean, this author did a fantastic job at tackling so many different things. There were so many themes in this one. But I think she really zeroed in on race, but more specifically, she zeroed in on class, wealth, gender, and just the lingering effects of colonialism. And I just loved how it just asked really big questions, of which I feel the biggest one was just whether or not a successful black person can ever transcend race. Because it's, you know, it's a question of our time, really. And I also feel the author took a bunch of risk with this novel, not just in the story she was telling, but just the format in which she chose to tell the story. It's told in a narrative voice. It read to me like an instant classic. It felt poetic at the same time to me as well. I got hints of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. It also made reference to bell hooks, as well as the writings of Claudia Rankine. It just felt like this classic, this great achievement that was just so fearless all around. And I can see myself recommending this book in particular for years to come. And yeah, I'm here to tell you, if you haven't read this book yet, I highly recommend you pick it up. It's a great 2021 debut to read in 22. You know, don't throw away those 21 books. So I highly recommend you give it a go. And again, it's Assembly by Natasha Brown. Readers, our top 10 books of 2021 series has now come to an end. However, the recommendations I've shared along with all the readers who've come on the show are great books to read in 2022 and beyond. We've also come to the end of season 1 of the Reader's Couch podcast. And I just want to thank all the authors and readers who've joined me on the couch and talked all things books. And even though season 1 of the Reader's Couch podcast has come to an end, I'm looking forward to speaking with more authors and readers about books in season 2 and beyond. So in the meantime, take care, happy reading, and happy 2022. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Reader's Couch. You can find out more about the show and submit your questions for our guest by visiting our website, thereaderscouch.com. You can also connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Couch Is Booked. If you like the show, please subscribe, share, and take a few seconds to leave a rating and review. Next week, I'll be back with new guests, more books, and some fun games we can play. But until then, stay lounging, stay reading, and whenever you're in doubt, go straight to your local bookstore or library. Thanks for listening, and happy reading.